We all know Chernobyl. We all know Fukushima. But those are the ones they couldn't hide. Today we're going through 10 nuclear disasters that governments tried to keep secret and in most cases succeeded for decades. Let's get into it. On January 24th, 1961, a U.S. Air Force B-52 broke apart mid-air over Goldsboro, North Carolina. The plane was carrying 2 Mark 39 hydrogen bombs. Each one had a yield of 4 megatons, 250 times the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Both bombs fell to Earth. One parachuted down and landed intact. The other, this is the one that should keep you up at night, went through every single step of the arming sequence. The safety switch that prevented detonation was a single low voltage switch. One switch. If that switch had failed, a 4 megaton hydrogen bomb would have detonated over North Carolina. The US government kept the details classified for over 50 years. A declassified document later confirmed that the bomb completed all the arming steps except one. One switch between you and a nuclear detonation on American soil, and they didn't tell anyone for 50 years. On January 17, 1966, a US B-52 collided with a refueling plane during a mid-air refueling over the coast of Spain. The B-52 was carrying 4 hydrogen bombs. All 4 fell. 2 of them detonated their conventional explosives on impact, not the nuclear core, but enough to scatter radioactive plutonium across the Spanish countryside. The US military launched a cleanup operation. They removed 1,400 tons of contaminated soil, put it in barrels, and shipped it back to the United States. The Spanish government was told. The Spanish public was not. Not fully. Not for years. Some of the contaminated soil was left behind. In 2015, the US and Spain signed a new agreement to resume cleanup. 50 years later, 4 hydrogen bombs fell on a NATO ally, contaminated the soil, and the full story was buried for decades. The Rocky Flats plant was a US government facility south of Boulder, Colorado that manufactured plutonium triggers for nuclear weapons, the components that detonate hydrogen bombs. Plutonium is pyrophoric, meaning it can spontaneously ignite. In 1957, a fire broke out in a plutonium processing building. The fire burned for 13 hours and released plutonium into the atmosphere. The public was not informed. The Colorado state government was not informed. Then, in 1969, it happened again. A second major fire in a plutonium building. This time, the fire came dangerously close to breaching a vault containing thousands of pounds of plutonium. If it had, the resulting contamination would have made the Denver metropolitan area uninhabitable. Again, the public was not told the full scale of what happened. The full extent of the contamination from both fires was classified for decades. On October 10, 1957, a fire broke out in the core of the Windscale nuclear reactor in Cumbria, England. It was Britain's worst nuclear accident. The reactor was burning for 3 days. Radioactive material was released into the atmosphere and spread across Britain and Europe. The government suppressed the full scale of the disaster. The official report was heavily redacted. Milk from 500 surrounding farms was diluted into the national supply instead of being discarded, because admitting it was too contaminated to drink would have caused major panic. The full report was finally declassified in 1988, 31 years later. It revealed that the fire had been far worse than admitted, and that the government had knowingly allowed contaminated milk to enter the food supply. A nuclear fire that burned for 3 days, and the government put the contaminated milk in your glass. On January 3rd, 1961, the SL-1 nuclear reactor at the National Reactor Testing Station in Idaho exploded. 3 military operators were killed, the only reactor fatalities in US history. The explosion was caused by a control rod being manually withdrawn too far. The reactor went prompt critical, meaning it went from nothing to explosion in milliseconds. The 3 men were killed instantly. 1 was pinned to the ceiling by a control rod. The Army's official conclusion was operator error, but there were rumors that one of the operators had deliberately pulled the rod because of a romantic jealousy involving a colleague's wife. The Army denied it. The records were sealed. The bodies of the operators were buried in lead-lined caskets sealed in concrete because they were so radioactive. 3 soldiers killed by a reactor explosion, and the question of whether it was an accident or something darker was buried with them. The Hanford site in Washington state produced the plutonium for the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki. It also produced something else, the most contaminated nuclear site in the United States. From 1944 to 1971, the US government knowingly released radioactive water into the Columbia River. The river was used as a cooling system. The water came out contaminated and went straight back into the river. Downstream communities used the Columbia River for drinking water, irrigation, and fishing. The full extent of the contamination was classified for decades. The government's own documents showed that officials were aware of the health risks as early as the 1940s and just chose to continue. The Hanford cleanup is now the most expensive environmental remediation project in US history. Over $50 billion spent, and it's still not done. The government dumped radioactive water into a river that people drank from for 27 years, and then classified the documents that proved it knew. On March 1st, 1954, the United States detonated a thermonuclear device on Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. It was the largest US nuclear test ever conducted, 15 megatons. That's 1,000 times the power of Hiroshima. The yield was far larger than scientists predicted. They underestimated it by a factor of 3. The fireball vaporized part of the atoll. Radioactive fallout spread across the Marshall Islands. The crew of the Japanese fishing boat Lucky Dragon No. 5, which was 80 miles away, was covered in radioactive ash. 1 crew member died. The people of the Marshall Islands, including the Rongelap Atoll, which was not evacuated for 2 days, were exposed to massive radiation levels. The US government knew the wind was blowing toward inhabited islands, but they detonated it anyway. The full scale of the contamination and its health effects on the Marshallese people was classified and fought in courts for decades. On February 5, 1958, a US B-47 collided with an F-86 fighter jet during a training mission off the coast of Georgia. The B-47 was carrying a Mark 15 nuclear bomb. To stabilize the damaged aircraft, the crew was given permission to jettison the bomb. They dropped it into the waters off Tybee Island. The bomb has never been recovered. The Air Force searched for weeks, but nothing. In 2001, the government declassified documents confirming that the bomb was a fully functional nuclear weapon, not a training dummy as previously claimed. The bomb is still there, somewhere off the coast of Georgia, in shallow water near a populated area. There's a nuclear bomb. The government says it's safe. The government also said it was a training dummy for 43 years, so what do we know? During the Cold War, the Soviet Union needed somewhere to dump its nuclear waste. They chose a lake. Lake Karachay was a small natural lake near the Mayak nuclear facility in the Ural Mountains. From 1951 onward, Mayak used the lake as an open-air dumping ground for radioactive waste. Not contained, not stored, just dumped. By the 1990s, Lake Karachay was the most polluted place on Earth. Standing on the shore for 1 hour would give you a lethal dose of radiation. The lake was so radioactive that it could kill a human in less time than it takes to watch this video. In the 1960s, wind blew radioactive dust from the dried lake bed across the surrounding region, irradiating thousands of people. The Soviet government said nothing. In the 1970s and 80s, they began filling the lake with concrete to prevent the dust from spreading. The lake is now mostly covered, but the radioactive waste is still there, just underneath the concrete. Awesome. In the eastern steppe of Kazakhstan, there is a place the Soviet Union called the Polygon, the Semipalatinsk test site. From 1949 to 1989, 40 years, the Soviet Union conducted 456 nuclear tests there. 116 of them were atmospheric. The tests were conducted in the open air. The radioactive fallout spread across the steppe and over the communities living nearby. The Soviet government did not tell the people of Kazakhstan that nuclear tests were being conducted near their homes. There were no warnings, no evacuations, no protective measures. Children played in the fallout, thinking the ash was snow. The local population has cancer rates, birth defect rates, and mortality rates far above normal to this day. The full scale of the health impact was classified until the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. When Kazakhstan gained independence, they shut the site down, but the damage was done. 40 years of nuclear tests over a populated area, and the people living there didn't No. 1.5 million people are estimated to have been affected. The Soviet government knew, the Soviet military knew, and for 40 years the people of Kazakhstan went about their lives while the government detonated nuclear weapons over their homes. That's not a disaster that happened. That's a disaster that was chosen. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kosolowski, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!